Welcome everyone to the SDG Analytics in R certificate course. I'm so excited that you've decided to join us. And in this video, I'd like to talk about a few things. First, I'd like to introduce who we are, both as people and as organizations, who you are as students and professionals taking the course. And then I'll dive into some logistics, as well as diving into the data that we're going to use for the course and talk about the Sustainable Development Goals in general, what they mean, how we're using data to measure them, and kind of taking a step back and looking at this whole SDG landscape before we dive into coding in R and actually getting to analyze some of the SDG data. So first, as organizations, we're the Allspice Alliance. So this is a $10 million NSF-funded data science alliance focused on building data science capacity in Hawaii and the Pacific. We're also CFL Honolulu, so one of 29 global centers focused on training, education, and research for the SDGs. And lastly, we're Chaminade University of Honolulu. So we're a Native Hawaiian serving institution, a Marinus institution located in Honolulu, Hawaii. So that's who we are as organizations. If we scroll down a little bit to the bottom right of this page, we see Victoria de la Cruz. She's been an amazing part in building this course. She's a senior data science student at Chaminade University. And you'll see her video modules in Intro to R and Basic Data Viz, as well as a really cool troubleshooting guide. And then I'm Connor Flynn. I'm a sustainability analyst for our UNC Full Honolulu Center that I introduced, as well as the undergraduate research coordinator for our NSF Allspice Alliance grant. I've been in this SDG data science world for about 2 years now, so I'm really excited to share all the things that I've learned, as well as that intro to coding, intro to R experience, but just through this SDG lens that I think is a really rich way to learn data science. And now just a little bit about you, our target audience. When we were proposing this course to you all, we have students from both Chaminade University and other undergraduate institutions. We have professionals in the UN and SDG world, as well as just some enthusiasts interested in learning about the SDGs and getting into programming in R. So a really, I think, rich first cohort here that I'm excited to have. There is no coding experience or background knowledge of the SDGs required. I think you knew this when you applied, but we do have some folks with some coding experience, as well as some folks that have been interested in the SDGs and that landscape for a while. So we have a nice diverse skill set. But again, we've built this course with no expectations in programming in R or background knowledge of the SDGs. So that's where we're all starting together and where we'll go in this course. This is meant to really be a positive experience. So we've taken everything we've learned in these data science courses and everything we've learned as a CFL Center in Honolulu, reading research about the SDGs and how people are using data science to approach the SDGs. And we wanted to put it into just one 6-week course that didn't take too much of all of your time to just get you interested and get you hopefully this really nice introduction into the SDG data landscape and into programming in R. This is meant to be a really enthusiastic, fun experience. And we're hoping that we've built that with these modules and that we can show you in office hours exactly the way that we want to perform data science and how we want this course to feel as students. So that's like the general feeling for the course that I wanted to provide to you all. Now I'd like to get into a little bit of course logistics. So it's a 6-week course starting on March 25th. And you'll see here we have office hours. So this will happen every week of the course. We strongly encourage you to attend office hours for any reason at all. This could be troubleshooting code, chatting about the theory behind the code, chatting about the UN and SDGs overall. I think the SDGs do a great job serving as a framework, but I always encourage us to be critical about the SDGs and try to ask what doesn't fall under the SDGs, what are some challenges around them, I think is a really healthy conversation to have. And then as well, just hanging out and getting to know each other and talking about data science in general and what future experiences we might have for you all. So we strongly encourage you to come to those office hours. Tuesdays, it's going to be Victoria from 9 to 10:30. She'll be on Zoom with the Zoom link provided here. On Thursdays, it's going to be me, so you can meet me in person at Chaminade University, upstairs from the Data Science Center, or on Zoom. And my Zoom link is provided here. And now I'll get to due dates and the modules themselves. So you'll see in the top part of this homepage here, we have things like course intro, installation guide. Each of these are modules in the course, and we have about 2 of them per week. And in each module, you'll see challenges. So our course intro has a challenge. It's just generating some visualizations from pre-existing tools. So things pre-existing made by the UN that we can generate maps and that kind of thing just within a browser. So that'll be this challenge that I'll explain pretty shortly, but each of these modules has a challenge that you'll do, as well as instructions for submitting them in the installation guide. There's a tab on how to accept and submit assignments. So here are the due dates for those challenges that fall within each module. We have 2 modules this first week of March 25th that are due midnight on March 31st. One is the course introduction, so generating those visualizations that I'm talking about, and I'll show you further in just a little bit. And then the installation guide. So the challenge with the installation guide is very simple. If you do everything in the installation guide correctly, I will see it on my end via GitHub Classroom that we'll talk about in just a little bit as well. So there's no specific challenge submission, but if you do everything in the installation guide, you should be all set for week 1 and ready to start coding in week 2. So yeah, these are due midnights on Sundays once a week until we get to April 21st. And then weeks 5 and 6 are just focused on your final project. And that final project will be due midnight on May 5th. There's a whole tab on the website just focused on the final project guidelines. So please check that out. I encourage you to check it out as early in the course as you can, because then you're thinking about that final project as you're learning everything. So yeah, I checked that out right after this video, so you can have that in the back of your mind as you're going through these modules. So that's everything for logistics. Please let me know if you have any questions via email or by stopping by on Zoom. But now I'd like to get into the course introduction. So before we get into coding, let's chat about the data that we'll be using for the course. And that data is around the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. And so what are these SDGs? I think this is a really nice statement about they provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people on the planet now and into the future. So if we think about what a better future looks like for all of us, this vision, the shared vision of a better future, how can we measure that? And I think that's what the 17 SDGs try to do, both with data collection, with collaboration. They serve as vehicles for funding and capital to move. So they serve as kind of these big picture items that we share a vision to kind of get to this future defined by the 17 SDGs. But they also serve, I think, as things that we can participate in every day. So we have SDG 1 is no poverty. SDG 2 is zero hunger. So just doing things, right, like going to your local food bank and serving some meals. Or we have a program here in Hawaii, Aloha Harvest, that rescues food from grocery stores and restaurants. So that would be falling under SDG 2, those kinds of efforts. So I think we participate in the SDGs in very local ways. But sometimes we think of them as these really big blueprints for this shared vision of kind of all of our future. So they serve a lot of different purposes, and I think they do a good job at creating this blueprint. But like I said, in office hours, we can always criticize certain parts of them or ask questions about, do they really fit the shared vision that we're hoping for? And are they measuring what matters to us? I think is a really healthy conversation. So I encourage that in office hours or any time that you'd like to chat. So these 17 SDGs are highlighted in this video here that I encourage you to check out. Things from, no poverty to affordable and clean energy to life on land and below water. So each of them has a goal there. And that could be further explained just by looking at the layers of the SDGs. So if we click on this, I'll open it in a new tab. And we'll look at goal 1, no poverty. So this is to end poverty in all of its forms everywhere. You'll see here we have an overview, but then we have targets and indicators. So under this no poverty SDG, target 1.1 is by 2030, eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere, currently measured as people living on less than $1.25 a day. So this is the target, eradicating this extreme poverty. And how do we measure this target? And if we're getting close to achieving it, we measure it by measuring the proportion of the population in a country living below the international poverty line by sex, age, employment status, and geographic location. So that international poverty line of less than $1.25 a day, we're measuring the proportion of the population in a country that falls below that poverty line. So that's the way we're measuring. So you start to see that this goal one, no poverty, like what exactly does that mean? And that's when we get into targets. And target 1.1 is eradicating extreme poverty. And we measure that with the indicator of the proportion of the population living below the international poverty line. And you'll see here these targets and indicators move for every SDG. So SDG 1 has them. SDG 7 is about affordable and clean energy. Some of the targets there are looking at renewable energy, and we would measure them by maybe how much of the energy a country consumes is renewable, right? So thinking about the target affordable and clean energy, or the goal affordable and clean energy. Target would be transitioning to renewables by 2030. And maybe the indicator would be how much of the electricity we consume in a country is renewable versus non-renewable. So this is that kind of layering of goals, targets, and indicators that I wanted to cover. And that's what makes the SDGs really data rich, is these indicators, these ways of measuring that we can look at, we can see progress, we can see where challenges remain. And now let's get into the data that we use for the course. So every module in this course uses data from the 2023 Sustainable Development Report. So I'll click on that so you can check it out. And here it is. So here's the website. So feel free to browse and explore this website as much as you'd like. We will be using the data from the downloads and materials. So here, under this Access Full database as an Excel spreadsheet, this is where all of the data that we'll be using for the course comes from, this one data set here. So what we've done is we've downloaded this and we've actually moved it, it says here, into the data folder, into the R project that you'll clone with GitHub. So this is further explained in the installation guide. But after you perform the installation guide, you'll see that you'll have this right bottom pane here, and you'll have a data folder that has this SDR, which stands for Sustainability Development Report 2023 data.csv. Just for fun, in some of the R markdowns, we load in that data so I can show you what it looks like. Like for example, in Basic Viz, one of these code chunks that you'll learn about in just a little bit loads in the SDR data. That's Sustainable Development Report data. And really quickly, when we run that code and look in our environment, this is what it looks like. So this is the same thing that you'll see in that Excel sheet. It has a country column, it has percentage missing values, it has populations of countries, and then goal one, colors that we'll talk about in just a second, trends, so are countries improving or being stagnant or even declining on progress towards a goal. And then we have individual indicators in this data set as well. So I just wanted to show you this is exactly where the data comes from. We've taken the liberty of going and downloading it for you and putting it into R so that you can focus more on the coding instead of doing file path management and all of that kind of stuff. We thought it would give us a little bit of a head start for the course. But if you ever wanted to download it, this would be the place to do so. So let's take a look at this full database here on the Sustainable Development Report. Double click to open it. We'll check it out with Excel. And here we have a few different tabs. So we have the home page, if you will, or the about. And this talks a little bit about the colors assigned to each SDG. So green would be goal achievement, yellow would be challenges remain, orange, significant challenges remain, and red is major challenges. So the methodology that we'll look at kind of will tell you exactly how those colors are defined. So the difference, right, between major challenges and significant challenges is pretty specific, right? So we want to see how exactly the math works to break that down. And then even things like time series. So how do we define moderately increasing on a progress towards a goal versus stagnating versus decreasing? So looking at data over time and trying to track, are they maintaining achievement, or are they slowly improving, or even stagnating or decreasing? And then if we look at the overview, this part of the data set just has each SDG, a country, a color, and a trend. So we'll have Finland in the second row there as the first country, with green assigned to SDG 1, no poverty. And it seems like they are maintaining achievement in this goal. However, in no hunger, Finland seems to be struggling with red, major challenges remain, and this stagnating there. So major challenges remain, and those aren't improving, right? It seems like stagnant in that aspect, that SDG 2. So that's the overview. The code book has the indicator codes that we'll see in the SDR 2023 data. So sometimes these are shortened. So we'll see like SDG1 underscore WPC. And this is actually the poverty headcount ratio at $2.15 a day. So we'll see a lot of this in our data set. And we always want to reference back to this Excel sheet to look at, okay, exactly what is that indicator, right? Because we don't want to assume anything just from these shortened titles. We want to be sure that we have the whole story here in that indicator. We also have a little bit of information about how those thresholds are defined. So we have optimums. So like an optimum for this poverty headcount ratio at $2.15 a day. The optimum would be 0. So 0% of the population, right, under that poverty. A green threshold is if you have less than 2%. So less than 2% of your population living at under $2.15 a day. The red threshold, so where you'd get a red color for that score, is 13. So if you have over 13% of your country living at less than $2.15 a day, you'll be marked red for that SDG. You'll see that exists, right, for every SDG here. And there's even a justification for the optimum, and you'll see it changes, right? So there's SDG targets. Sometimes it's average of the best performers. So this one looks like for poverty rate after taxes, what is the average of the best performers? So the countries performing best at the SDGs, what is the average for them in that indicator? And that might serve as the optimum, right? The optimum might not always be 0. So this is just some of the methods that goes behind the colors that we see. And if we continue on, you'll see this, right, for every SDG. And each of these justifications are mapped out in the methodology. So let's go check out that methodology. If we open it up, here we have a 56-page, very detailed report on the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Report. Developing this kind of data set is really comprehensive. And in order to be as transparent as possible and for people to interpret the data in the best way, this kind of methods paper is really important. So that's why it's the data set that I chose for this course, because they did such a fantastic job at outlining the methods that they used. And in this paper, we see tons of things. So we see an introduction to the story behind the data, some of the general approach to the SDGs, just simple definitions there or outlines. We see the number of indicators and how they've grown just between 2016 and 2018. You'll see on the website I mentioned that this methods paper only goes up to 2018 is the most recent version available. So kind of unfortunate that it hasn't been updated, but is the best version available to us. So that's what we'll be using for the course. And here we have some justification regarding the selection for the indicators and the criteria that they have to meet. And then if we keep scrolling down, we look at that 5-arrow system, so that trend system that we talked about. So decreasing is simple to find, just that the country is moving in the wrong direction. Stagnating is a little more complex, where score remains stagnant or is increasing at a rate below 50% of the growth rate needed to achieve the SDG by 2030. Moderately increasing, so that slightly upwards arrow is increasing at a rate above 50% of the required growth rate, but below the rate needed to achieve the SDG by 2030. On track is the score is increasing at the rate needed to be achieved by 2030. And then our sideways green arrow is maintaining SDG achievement. So that's the difference in some of the math looking at growth rates and what is needed to achieve the goal by 2030. A little bit of a graphic there to explain that as well. And as we keep going, we see some of those different rationales used to define the targets. So we saw the average of the top 5 performers. So around 45% of the targets are defined by the average of the top performers. There's technical optimums, leave no one behind, and targets. These are each defined pretty thoroughly in this document. And as we keep going, we'll just see more and more, right, specifics into the data that we're using. It is very comprehensive, right? We have official versus non-official data, what exactly that means, what the sources are, what's classified as official and non-official, where the data comes from, so the different organizations the data is collected from, and this nice tree map here. And we could keep going, and I'll stop there, but I strongly encourage you as you're looking through the data and you're asking questions, especially about your final project, reference this methodology and check it out because it's really important in telling the story of how the data came about and how we can interpret it. So I'll leave the methodology for now. And now we'll get into exploring SDG data. So this is what the challenge will be focused on. So there's some amazing tools out there that have already been created for us to explore the data for the 2023 Sustainable Development Report. So they have maps that can be accessed through this link. So when we open this map, right, we see that we can select one of the SDGs. This is the overall score, so based on all SDGs. But say if we want to check out affordable and clean energy, we see the map change, and it seems like this color scheme, right, of green, yellow, orange, and red that we talked about, defining how a country is doing on an SDG. We could look at the specific trends in each country. So if we go from ratings to trends, we can see who's on track, who's moderately improving, who's stagnating, and who's decreasing. Looks like here in the US, we're moderately improving, but not at the rate we need to achieve the goal by 2030, right? So we can look at that. We can look at specific indicators. So if we wanted to check out or stay below SDG 7, maybe we can look at population with access to electricity. This is the population, right? The percentage of the population with access to electricity. We're looking at that indicator. We're looking at the legend here in green. We can look at the actual values, so the actual percentages if we liked. We can look at that over time. So this starts in 2000, and you see over time as populations are gaining access to electricity, they should be getting more and more yellow. We see even at the beginning, right? A lot of the world did have almost 100% access to electricity. We see trends. We see where, access to electricity is even stagnating or decreasing. But this is just electricity in general, right? So if we wanted to check out a different indicator, maybe population with access to clean fuels, or maybe even better is renewable energy share in the total final energy consumption. So here we see a lot more orange and red, right? Challenges remaining regarding this indicator. We see some trends, right? So who's moving forward or backwards on this renewable energy measure? And then the actual values, right? So if we hover over, we can see in the US, around 10% of our energy share is coming from renewable energy. So a lot of room for improvement. And the lighter we get towards 55, right? Seems to be the higher scores or the long-term objectives. So a lot of room to improve, it seems globally, right? But I just wanted to demonstrate how we can move through this map. We can look at goals, indicators, trends, ratings, and even specific values. So this will be part of your homework, but I'd like to introduce some other features that they have as well. So they have line charts, right? So maps are just one way to visualize data. If we wanted to just look at certain countries, we could add countries here that we're interested in. We can search them by name. And we could look at, again, overall scores, indicators, metrics over time and see what that separation looks like. Since we've looked at SDG 7, maybe let's look at SDG 3. So this is maternal mortality rates. So per 100,000 live births, what are the maternal mortality rates? And we see lots of dropping rates here, right? Which is a good thing. If we wanted to look for a select or specific country, we could always do that and add it to this line chart and see how it's comparing to the pre-selected countries. They also have scatter plots. So if we wanted to look at maybe relationships between variables, we'll be building this in the course during our advanced data viz. But if we wanted to look at relationships between two variables, we could always look at, let's think, maybe we could look at births attended by skilled health personnel. And on the y-axis, we could look at maternal mortality again. It's just out of some guess, right? Those two things might be related, and it does look like most of our countries fall here, right? With lower maternal mortality rates and high percentages of births attended by skilled personnel. But there is some range, right? We see in Indonesia and South Africa, slightly higher maternal mortality rates, but close to 100%, around 94, 96% of births attended by skilled health personnel. So I would encourage you to add a country. And maybe if it's a country, right, that you think might struggle in this area, they would appear on a different part of the graph. So it's a good way to compare two things together. The last thing that we can look at are dashboards that allow us to visualize SDG data for more specific places. So there's the Sustainable Development Report for the whole globe, so each country, but there's also a United States Development Report. So similar methodology, we can make maps of just the US and look at overall scores. We could look at certain indicators. You'll see the indicators and targets change a little bit for the US Sustainable Development Report. We could look at primary healthcare, percent of need met, and we see there's lots of improvement for meeting primary healthcare. And the percentage of need met, right, tends to be low. A lot of this blue is around 37%, 20%. So we can make maps of just the US and see how those indicators change on this platform. And then one great platform is the Small Island Developing States platform. So here we can look at all sorts of things. We can look at geospatial data. We can look at multi-dimensional vulnerability index. So trying to think of multiple factors linking together an environment, geography, economic and financial settings, and trying to see how those interact. There's a ton of data just in these indicators. We could look at data from the Ocean Health Index and look at maybe biodiversity scores and look at bar charts and see how biodiversity is doing in small and developing states. We could look at our specific SDG indicators. So if we wanted to check out sustainable development goals, we can look under each SDG and say if we want to look at SDG 3, we could look at specific targets. So maybe 3.2, we could look at neonatal deaths or infant mortality. We can look at alcohol use disorder, adolescent birth rate, for 1,000 women between 15 and 19 or 10 and 14. So by SDG, we can search on the SIDS data platform. I think it does a really good job. It's unfortunate that small and developing states are often left out of the Sustainable Development Report, but we've answered that question in this course in two ways. I've downloaded and put in the Small and Developing State Sustainable Development Report as a separate data set in the R project that you all have access to. That's also talked about in the final project guideline. So we have that, and then we have things like these platforms that do a good job of meeting that demand for those gaps in data and just looking at how to fill those gaps specifically for small islands. So we have those different ways of creating visualizations. So if we go back to our course homepage, the challenge that I'm asking you to do is to create two visualizations. And for each visualization, write 4 sentences describing what you see. So you would create something on one of these 4 platforms that I showed you, and then write about it. What do you see? Do you have a hypothesis for what you saw? Were you surprised? Was it intuitive? So just give us 4 sentences just describing the visualization that you've created. You may wonder after doing these challenges and exploring all these tools, like why learn to code when all of these tools are already available to us? And I think the simple answer is that we always hit limits and barriers regarding the questions we want to answer if we're always relying on these data exploration tools to be created for us. So we'll always hit boundaries, right? Because someone had to anticipate us asking that question and then design something so that we can click and drag and explore that data. But the ability to code allows us to customize our analysis and research without any limitations. So we can really think outside the box. You can think of coding, I think, is really empowering in a way that we can ask questions and we don't need to rely on any pre-made platforms. Because as you see in the course, we'll get really creative on the questions we can ask from the SDGs, and we'll want some coding to help us answer those questions. So that's everything. You'll download those 2 data visualizations and sentences describing them into a PDF and email it to me and Victoria. Our emails are listed there. This will be the only challenge that will be submitted via email. The rest will be through GitHub Classroom that you'll see in the installation guide. So this is the only thing you'll email to us for the duration of the course. But just since it's the first one, just exploring the SDGs and those data science tools to visualize the SDGs, we wanted to make it nice and simple and just have you email a PDF to us. And that will be, again, due at midnight on Sunday that you can see in the logistics tab. So that's everything on the SDG data landscape. This could be a whole course in itself, but I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to the data set that we're using. We're going to stick with that one data set throughout the course. And from there, we hope that you learn, you enjoy, you keep referencing those methods. And if you'd like to have deeper conversations about some of the things that we went over, please jump in office hours and I'd be delighted to talk about it with you all. But thank you and welcome to the course. This is going to be great.